I'm Angela.
And I'm Paige.
Join us as we dive into our obsession with true crime, history, and mysterious stories. We'll explore the intricate details of the corrupt, the cruel, and the calculating.
We assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this episode. The Corrupt Podcast is based on the facts and our opinions of the case. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Corrupt Podcast. Hans Asperger was made famous for the discovery and research on the Asperger syndrome, which was later included in the autism spectrum. He specialized in the study of children during the 1940s and would participate in the atrocities of the Nazi regime, including sending dozens of children to their death at Am Spiegelgrund Children's Clinic.
Quick shout out to our newest Patreon Corrupt crew member, Carlene.
Welcome, Carlene.
By definition, Gemüt is a German word meaning mind, feelings, soul, or heart. It is a notoriously impossible word to translate. In Nazi Germany, Gemüt was referring to a person's capability to form bonds with other people. This was incredibly important, as Nazis were worried about individuals that could drag the collective down.
This episode contains abuse and murder of children during World War II. There has also been a change in terminology since the 1940s. For example, Hans would describe children with certain psychological traits as autistic psychopaths. This was a way of labeling the children who were brilliant but missed social cues and preferred isolation. So, one of the reasons why we are doing this episode today is because I came across an Instagram post a couple months ago that had two autistic children restrained in straitjackets and chained by their ankles to radiators from the 1940s. I broke. I cried and then got heated and then cried and got furious again. It was just an ongoing cycle. These were autistic children that had no idea what was going on because they wouldn't have been able to understand. Who the F was doing this to them? And then I got into the articles that went into a deep black hole of something I was completely unaware of with Hans Asperger. Something I think Paige and I want to be upfront with our audience about is that we understand this is a delicate topic. We have been affected by it. My late brother, who was special needs, he had a string of incapabilities due to his syndrome, but he was capable of so many other things. This story needs to be heard, but also protected. We are going to try our best to do that.
Johann Hans Friedrich Karl Asperger was born on February 18, 1906, in an agricultural village 50 miles from Vienna, Austria. Known as Hans, he was the eldest son of Johann and Sophie Asperger. Johann was from a long line of farmers, and although he became a bookkeeper, he had higher plans for Hans.
As a teenager, Hans joined the German youth movement. This movement was popular with German children as a way to learn about the outdoors. Hans continued a lifelong passion for the outdoors and hiking. He even met his wife Hannah while mountain climbing.
In 1925, Hans enrolled at the University of Vienna for medical studies. World War I had ended 7 years earlier, and Vienna was still recovering. Refugees and ex-soldiers headed to Vienna after the war. This led to rampant diseases, lack of housing, and food. Vienna was not a great place at the time Hans moved there in 1925, and it wouldn't be long before it got much worse for Vienna with World War II.
6 years later, Hans graduated with a medical degree on March 26, 1931, at 25 years old. He was hired right into the University of Vienna's Children's Hospital. The hospital was under new management when the prior director died by suicide. Hans made 120 shillings a month with this position. The hospital had started to follow Nazi ideology, and the new director fired all Jewish and liberal workers.
In 1933, Hitler came to power in Germany. At the University of Vienna Children's Hospital, Hans saw a huge change in the medical staff. All medical practitioners were required to swear loyalty to Hitler and register their bloodline. 78% of the faculty lost their jobs, with the majority just because they were Jewish. This left the medical field with almost all Nazis.
Hans and the Curative Education Clinic thrived in the Nazi regime, even though Hans didn't join the Nazi Party. In the same year, the law for the prevention of hereditarily diseased offspring, or the sterilization law, was passed. Hans was a vocal supporter of this law that would force sterilization to promote a pure race. At least 400,000 people were sterilized for conditions like blindness, deafness, physical deformity, alcoholism, or epilepsy.
In May of 1934, Hans joined the Fatherland Front, a group that followed Nazi beliefs, but also wanted to keep Austria separate from Germany. This wasn't the only membership with questionable agenda. In the same year, he joined the Association of German Doctors in Austria, which had a goal of keeping Jewish doctors from practicing medicine. The association also compiled a list of these doctors, which later helped the Nazis in removing the Jewish population.
Hans was promoted to Curative Education Department at the University of Vienna's Children's Hospital in May 1934. At just 28 years old, he was given the position over more qualified doctors. The Curative Education Department would eventually have the name changed to the Special Needs Department. The children in this ward had developmental or physical disabilities.
These children had been kept in bed all day until 1926, when the department was changed to feel more like a, quote, home. Since that time, the children were given toys, lessons, fresh air, and they even celebrated Christmas. This was not typical for the children's ward at that time.
The University of Vienna's Children's Hospital pushed the Community Competence Program. The goal was to teach children how to be productive members of society. Hans coming into this position here that we're talking about and changing all these hospital standards may have seemed like a good thing, but it was papering over cracks. Would you agree with that?
Definitely. I think in some aspects it helped, those kids were kept locked in bed. I'm talking like cages around their beds 24/7. So for those children to be able to leave a bed, that is life altering for them. That's a huge, amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the Nazis are about to step in and it's about to get really bad and really terrifying as well.
Yeah, because I was a bit confused at this part. Seemed like Hans was actually doing a good thing. He got this new position. He was coming in here. He's basically taking, these developmental or physical children that have disabilities, become productive members of society. And then until I read on and on about it, I'm like, oh.
His definition of productive society member and our definition are two very, very different things.
True.
Like, your father is an alcoholic, well, you'll never be productive in society, so we should just euthanize you now, is basically what it boils down to a little bit later.
Yeah, pretty damn sick.
Very little is known about Hans's personal life. He married Hannah Coleman in 1935, and they had 5 children together, 4 daughters and a son. Based on his research, we know that Hans liked poetry, and he also really liked talking about himself in third person.
No, Aspergers don't like that.
No, Hans does not do this. Just kind of the cherry on top there.
Yeah. Nazi organized youth groups became mandatory in 1936. Boys aged 10 to 14 joined the German Young Volk, and girls of the same age joined the German Girls. I hope I pronounced that right. German Young Volk. Boys 14 to 18 joined Hitler Youth, and girls the League of German Girls. By 1939, children joining was not only mandatory, but strictly enforced.
In 1933, the Third Reich took over the school system and the curriculum. This was 3 years before the youth groups became mandatory. By the time the war ended in 1945, you could have teenagers or young adults that had only known Hitler's brainwashing for 12 straight years. There isn't much information to be found on how these kids adapted to post-war life. The Allies took over the school curriculum and promoted democracy, which helped if you were younger. Not everyone was committed to the Nazi regime, but the ones that were would have struggled in post-war Germany.
The children that rebelled against the mandatory youth groups were labeled as atypical or unreformable. They were sent to labor camps and reformatories, neither pleasant options. This was until 1939 when Hitler's child euthanasia program began.
Houston, we're heading south.
Yeah.
It's about to get rough. Hans was the director of the new motorized mother assisting program between October 1939 and July 1940. This program targeted healthy children with the intention to bring healthcare to rural areas. A nurse, a Reich welfare worker, and a doctor took a truck out and examined 5,600 children during Hans's 9 months as the director. Unfortunately, this program was another way for the Nazis to inspect the population for individuals considered genetically tainted. The program then worked with local health departments to catalog the children. In a 1940 inspection of 1,137 children, 62% had conditions that required consideration. Some of these conditions were severely flat feet, alcoholic parents, tuberculosis, the physically disabled, and a generic blanket they called feeble-mindedness.
The first recorded death in the child euthanasia program was on July 25th, 1939. And please bear with me, guys. I'm going to try to pronounce this name correctly. Gerhard Kretschmar was born blind, suffering seizures, and with only one full leg and one full arm. Gerhard's parents declared their son a monster and wrote to Hitler requesting permission to murder their son. Hitler sent his personal doctors to inspect 5-month-old Gerhard and was given a sedative and died 3 to 5 days later. Gerhard's official cause of death was heart failure.
Hans left the motorized mother assisting program in July of 1940, but just a month later, the euthanasia program began at Am Spiegelgrund. Spiegelgrund was the children's ward and part of a 356-acre estate with 35 pavilions, known as Steinhof Hospital. The pavilions were individual buildings, with each being dedicated to one condition. Originally, Steinhof was opened as a Vienna asylum in 1907, so think of it as Steinhof Hospital is the 356-acre estate with 35 pavilions or buildings. Then Spiegelgrund was the children's ward with 2 of those pavilions. The children's pavilions at Spiegelgrund were number 15 and 17. The killing ward was 15, and the children in 17 were under observation with the possibility of being sent to Pavilion 15 at any time.
It just makes me wonder if any of those kids knew that 15 was a killing ward. And
They absolutely did.
Being almost right next to that, knowing some of their friends maybe around them in Pavilion 17 would go into that ward and not come back.
So there's a story of a little boy that I don't remember his specific age, but he was probably 10 to 15 years old. And he was in Pavilion 17 for several years. So that was the observation ward. And he knew which children would disappear in Pavilion 15 because his window in 17 looked across and he could see into Pavilion 15. And he would see these children day after day lying in these beds. And there was one specific bed that if a child laid there within a day or two, the doctors would take away their body.
Oh, God.
And he knew. You're talking about a 10, 11, 12-year-old child looking from one window to the next building over and watching children die across the way from him. They were very aware.
That's absolutely terrible.
It's devastating.
You wouldn't want to wish that on your worst enemy, to see children die like that.
No, and you don't know what he had going on. He could have been flat-footed. The things were so small. For any small thing, you could be labeled feeble-minded. And then it was, well, what level of feeble-minded? And it's an arbitrary question because it's one doctor says, you're completely competent. And another doctor says, no, they need to go to Pavilion 15. And that's all it took. Just one person.
I remember being in school and just learning about Hitler and just the ridiculousness of it. The fact that he only liked people that had blue eyes and blonde hair, and the rest were just hogwash.
The Aryan race.
If you had brown hair, you'd die. If you'd had brown eyes, you'd die. If the idiocy of it. He was a complete idiot going off of physical features. It was just dumb.
You know that this was happening, right? Like, you know that there were bad things happening to kids. But until I started researching into this, I did not realize the details. Mm-hmm. I guess, like, I feel like in school and World War II books, they kind of gloss over it a lot. Like, concentration camps and death camps. Those were bad places. You've heard of Auschwitz.
But we were young.
But I did not
so
realize.
Young at that time.
Yes.
That's probably why it's glossy.
Probably. They didn't lean into this like we are leaning into this. So the statistics here are it's just devastating. There's no other word. These are children that we're talking about.
22% of the children referred to Spiegelgrund were from the area included in the motorized mother assisting program. 30% of children who died at Spiegelgrund had physical disabilities. 1 in 10 children had Down syndrome.
The windows were barred and the children slept in cots lined up 20 or more in a row. The children wore uniforms of shorts and a jacket, but the buildings with the euthanasia ward were not heated, and the children were not even provided winter coats. At the beginning of the war, children were fed a breakfast of bread that was sliced so thin you could see through it. This was better than the cabbage soup with worms floating in it for later war years, though. If the children vomited, they were held down and forced to eat the vomit.
I mean, this is inhumane, clearly. Like, I hope some of them tried to vomit on the staff.
I'm sure that they did, but they were also, the staff would give them shots that would make them sleep for 2 days too. So any rebellious act, and they were given a shot of, you're talking to kids, they have no idea what, that would put them to sleep for a couple of days. And then you just wake up more hungry than before.
And we have to keep an open mind about this, right? Because I don't know how to word this, but like the staff there, it was their decision to be there because that was their job, but it necessarily was, the upper ups giving the kill switches to these nurses and the staff and the medical team to do these harsh things to these children.
Like all of Nazi Germany, or in this case, Austria, there were good people trying to help the kids, and then there were people that took complete advantage of the situation. And there's like a 50-50 shot here between the hospital staff.
Yeah. Punishments were harsh. If the children didn't trim their nails, they might have meals withheld or be forced to do push-ups. The children who wet their bed were lined up and laughed at by the other children. How humiliating.
Yep.
The children were not allowed to speak to one another or form friendships. The staff actually pressured the children into laughing and tormenting each other, which seems like the opposite of what the Reich was supposed to be, aligning everyone with community spirit.
On September 1st, 1940, Hans was the speaker at the German Society for Pediatrics annual meeting. Hans stated that he greatly approved of the Third Reich's plan for child rearing. His presentation also included his plan to train children into desired traits and a change of personality.
Did I miss this? Like, what is child rearing?
Yeah, child rearing is like parenting. So bringing up a child. We as moms are child rearing.
Is that a known thing?
So
what? Or is it just an Austrian
I think it's kind of an older. No, it's just like an older term, I think. But what Hans is saying is that he really likes what Hitler's plan is here for parenting. He's not a Nazi, but boy, he agrees with a lot of Nazi ideology. Hans continued his work at the Children's Hospital, where every doctor was a Nazi except for Hans. This was primarily due to the fact that Nazi doctors had filled the empty job positions, as 70% of Austrian doctors did not join the Nazi Party. This decision did save Hans's reputation after the war, even though his actions were more aligned with the Nazis than he stated.
In August 1940, a decree was issued requiring medical professionals to report any child under 3 years old with mental or physical disabilities. The children would be assigned to one of the 37 special children wards for observation. A monetary bonus was provided to the medical staff for each referral to the children's wards, and another bonus was provided to the ward employees who recommended the child's death. Bonus.
The decree was extended to include any child under 14 years old. It's estimated that 5,000 to 10,000 children died due to this program between 1939 to 1945.
5,000 to 10,000 children. Absolutely disgusting.
It really is, and it only gets worse.
Yeah, strap in, guys.
It's all estimates as well. The Nazis were not keeping legible documentation. This stuff is scribbled on napkins. Like, they really have no idea how many children were murdered. We do know that at least 789 children died at Spiegelgrund, with 75% listing pneumonia as the cause of death. Spiegelgrund was the second largest child killing center of the Nazis. The children were given barbiturates, typically mixed into hot cocoa. This usually resulted in death quickly, but sometimes additional doses and starvation were used as well.
I just want to point out the 75% of patients that died from pneumonia were from the drugs that were given to them. This wasn't pneumonia caused by a random cold or flu. It was caused by a drug given by these monsters.
Correct. They definitely were not helping matters, though, by not providing these children with heat or winter coats, though.
Just 2 months later, adult killings began in the T4 program. Initially, the adults were sent to asylums or hospitals. The adults were starved to death, eventually gas chambers, or like the children, provided sedatives to induce illness. In a September 1940 conference, Hans's peer and fellow physician, Anna Leder, stated she studied 465 children that did not feel joy or sorrow, enthusiasm or warmth. She continued to say their intellect is hypervigilant, cunning, and resourceful in the service to their own interests. They lacked Gemüt. Anna diagnosed children with lacking Gemüt, or the part of their soul that allowed empathy, compassion, and the ability to love. Fucking hate Anna.
Yeah, she's even worse. Hans felt that Gemüt could be taught, but Anna disagreed. She pushed the matter further, saying that children should be interred and eradicated as soon as possible. Anna felt the children posed a risk to the Reich, as these children felt no guilt, would become criminals, and would become a burden on society. Unfortunately, even though Anna was recommending the murder of hundreds of children, many other doctors agreed with her.
Anna should have been eradicated from the community. Piece of crap. She makes me upset. Like, they felt no guilt, so they would be labeled as criminals? Get over yourself. Oh, makes me mad.
We know today that these children are autistic, and some of them, where they fell on the spectrum, was that they just wanted to be solitary. They didn't want to be part of the collective, which even if you're not autistic, there's so many people in the world that are like that.
Yeah.
And she just felt like it was going to drag them down. You have to get rid of these people. You need to be one for all, or else you need to be gotten rid of.
Hans learned a lot about the Nazi way in the 1940 conference that he would soon put into practice. By 1941, Hans clearly agreed with the sterilization policy. He believed some of the people were a burden on the community and required sterilization, while others could have their actions corrected and find their place in the greater organism of the Nazi lifestyle.
In late 1941, Hans created the Vienna Society for Curative Education. Hans picked 3 co-founders that were involved in the euthanasia programs. The goal of the society was to align children development with Nazi principles. 2 of the co-founders were directors of Spiegelgrund, with known ties to human medical experiments and euthanasia. So when Hans recommended difficult children be sent to Spiegelgrund, people at the time would have known what his recommendation truly meant.
Medical records are only available for 562 of the 789 children killed at Spiegelgrund. Some of the files are incomplete with notes jotted on scrap paper, so it's impossible to know how many children Hans sent to Spiegelgrund, but the number appears to be at least 40 children.
The determination on what happened to these children was on a case-by-case basis, depending on the doctor or nurse evaluating them. Boys were more likely to be sent for observation and labeled as unruly but correctable. If the boys were determined to be uneducatable and unemployable, they were sent to Pavilion 15. But the number of girls referred to Pavilion 15 far surpassed the boys. For a girl, the same unruly diagnosis was much more likely to be a death sentence. The warped thought process was that a woman's duty was to be a homemaker. If the girls were seen as unruly or wayward, they might run off and therefore be no use in society. A notable comparison was the study of 4 children: Elfriede, Marguerite, Fritz, and Harro.
Back to the medical records, that there was only like 562 of the 789 children killed at Spiegelgrund, and there was only 40 that we know of that Hans sent to Spiegelgrund. Does that mean the rest of those children were killed by other means?
So what Hans would do is he reviewed these children on a case-by-case basis. Some of the kids, he would say, they're incurable, they need to be sent to Pavilion 15. That was 40 of them. Some of the children, he said, hey, let's send them to Pavilion 17 for observation. Those children could have still got to 17. Somebody else looked at them and said, nope, send them to 15. So he knew that he was still putting them in the system and they could have gone to 15 and still been murdered. And we know that that did happen. He also sent them to group homes. He sent them to other homes for observation. And some of the children got to those homes and people took one look at them and said, no, they need to go to Pavilion 15. And it was the same exact thing. He did not send them home to their parents, or the parents might have said, we don't want them home, in which case they were referred over to Pavilion 15 anyways. We only have 40 verifiable situations where Hans signed off saying this child needs to go to Pavilion 15. The rest could have taken a very circular route, but still ended up there anyways, or been referred by any other doctor of those 789. They are not all associated with Hans.
That makes it a clearer vision for me. So 40, it's still like a large number, but out of the 562 or the 789 children that were killed, it just makes it seem like, oh, he did, diddly squat. But in reality, he was a monster, because these children he would send to different groups of what you just explained, and they would still end up there.
Yeah, it might not have been a direct order, but it was still a murder sentence. He knew that he was keeping them in the system, and that chances are somebody would send them to Pavilion 15 anyways. He was well aware of what was happening.
Okay, I'm glad we unpacked that.
And as you're going to see with these 4 children, Elfriede, Marguerite, Fritz, and Harro, they are all treated differently, and the girls are treated much more harshly than the boys are.
Us women bear children. It boggles my mind. Like, women go through so much shit. Why are they looked down upon so much? I will never understand it. We should all be equal.
Yeah, and in this situation, definitely not equal. They just thought, if you're wayward or you run away from your kids, what use are you in this society? You're not helping the collective. Whereas boys, it was like, well, we could still find a job that he would do as an adult. Surely we can make some kind of an accommodation. And girls, it was not that way at all.
They're running away because they're being treated like complete shit.
Yes, definitely with these 2 girls. And nobody asks that question. What's going on that you're running away? Why are you trying to get away?
Elfriede was 13 years old in 1944. She had been referred to Asperger's clinic due to running away without cause, being inadequately clothed, and staying out late. Elfriede's mother had recently remarried, and she had a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old sibling at home. Her family dynamic was not taken into consideration as a possible reason why she was running away from home. Under observation at Asperger's clinic, Elfriede laughed for no apparent reason and was considered abnormal. Elfriede was compassionate and affectionate to the nurses.
Marguerite, like Elfriede, was 13 years old when she was referred to the clinic in 1941. The referral was initially due to a failed first day at an internship and her wayward lifestyle. Marguerite had used her boss's credit to to purchase the equivalent of $87 in flowers and paper goods, then hadn't returned for her second day of work. She would be
especially cheeky with her mother, incite her siblings against her, and be very unwilling to help with the household.
Which sounds like a typical 13-year-old to me.
Exactly.
Once at the clinic, Marguerite did not join in conversations and never left. She was listed as very impulsive, superficial, and insincere. She wrote letters to her parents saying she would do better and drew pictures of the Asperger's clinic, but these were never mailed and were actually kept in her hospital file.
Fritz and Haro were younger than the girls. Fritz was 11 years old and Haro 8 years old in 1944. Fritz was expelled from kindergarten for extreme aggression and did not care for the company of others. Hans noted that Fritz did what he wanted and was always restless. Haro was referred because he also did what he wanted and not what he was asked to do in school. Haro also attacked other children and was mischievous. Hans declared both boys had autistic malice, saying,
"Their malice and cruelty too clearly arise from a poverty of the Gemüt."
Neither boy joined in games and preferred to be alone. They had erratic movements. Even though Fritz and Haro had similar characteristics as Marguerite and Elfriede, they were treated completely differently. Hans deemed the girls to have working-class families and barely interviewed them, but for the boys, he discussed their family background at length, even speculating that autism might be a result of upper-class breeding due to Fritz and Haro's backgrounds. This is kind of odd for me to understand because I would think Hans would more likely speculate that the lower-class breeding would be a result to autism, not the upper class. But he had to pull some sort of excuse out of his ass for the upper-class parent discussions.
Yeah, I wondered if it was like an inbreeding thing. Like there was too much, like there was not enough genetic pool there. I'm not really sure what he was getting at, though.
Yeah, he doesn't make any sense. Any freaking sense.
No, but he interviewed the boys' parents at length, wants to know everything about them. And at the girls, it was like, you come from working class, written off. Fritz and Haro were considered to have potential and were kept at the clinic. Fritz even had a special tutor hired for his schooling. It was not the same for Elfriede and Marguerite. Elfriede was deemed incurable and sent to Spiegelgrund. She appears to have known what was happening to her, as one of her last letters was sent to her uncle saying,
"I'll tell you only one thing. We will not see each other again. And this is the very last letter you will receive from me. I'm very sorry."
This letter was not mailed by the Asperger staff and was again found in Elfriede's file. Between 1941 and 1944, Marguerite would be removed from her home and sent to Asperger's clinic on 2 occasions, and Spiegelgrund twice as well. I searched the 789 known victims of Spiegelgrund for Elfriede and Marguerite. Neither are listed, so they both appear to have survived.
In addition to direct transfers, Hans sent many kids to the children's institutions. Often, this was just a roundabout way of sending them to Spiegelgrund because the institute might decide they didn't want the child and refer them on.
This is exactly what happened to 3-year-old Richard Draskovic, who had Down syndrome and a history of frequent chest colds. Hans had Richard institutionalized in a children's institute, but he was sent to Spiegelgrund. 8 days after his arrival, the request to murder Richard was approved as he was labeled incurable. Pneumonia would be listed as Richard's cause of death.
Herta Schreiber was 2.5 years old when she was referred directly to Spiegelgrund Pavilion 15, the euthanization pavilion. Herta was the youngest of 9 children and had caught meningitis and diphtheria, leaving her disabled. Herta's mother begged for Herta to be cured, but then stated if Herta was incurable, it might be best for her to die since she would be a laughing stock. Yeah, because that's way more important than a life. In Hans' transfer order, he also notes,
"When at home, this child must present an unbearable burden to the mother."
Herta was transferred to Spiegelgrund on July 1st, 1941, and she died within 2 months of arriving at Spiegelgrund from pneumonia.
Herta's intake photo is available online, but I'm going to warn you that it is horrifying. Her hair has been shaved, and she didn't have clothes on. You can see the terror on her face.
Every damn soul in that hospital ignored her, and even her mother. the whole thing makes me sick. And just to see her frail little face, so scared.
I'll be honest, like I cried when I saw her picture, and her face, I think, just says it all because she's so clearly looking for love and someone to just hug her. You know, she's 2.5. She has no idea what is happening. She doesn't know any of these people, and I'm sure they were not being gentle with her. You know, she's not being looked at as a human at that point. And she just looks so very terrified.
She was probably looking for her mom.
Yeah, her mom or one of her siblings, and she doesn't understand where she is and what's happening. It's horrifying. 5-year-old Elizabeth Schreiber was diagnosed with congenital feeble-mindedness of the highest order. One of 5 children, Elizabeth had caught a cold when she was 2 that left her unable to fully speak. According to Hans's report, the family was no longer able to care for Elizabeth. She arrived at Spiegelgrund on March 23, 1942, only able to say a single word, Mama. She was an affectionate child using basic sign language and hugging the nurses. She was subjected to medical experiments before her death on September 30th. Elizabeth's brain was harvested, jarred, and kept in a collection with 400 other brains in the cellar of Spiegelgrund.
I know I talked about having an open mind before, and like some of the medical staff, you know, didn't choose this or didn't choose to do these to children, but how could anybody stand there and let this happen? Let's talk about insanity since it's so close to this topic of asylums. The medical and the professional staff were the insane ones. Just even if they got the direct orders from other people, how could a person do this to a helpless child? I'm disgusted with the fact that I'm the same species as those pricks were. Like, that's how bad it is.
They labeled her feeble-mindedness of the highest order, but she was, limited verbal. She was able to say mama, and from all reports, that was the word that she kept saying over and over because she was looking for her mom. But she was also able to use sign language, so she knew what was going on and was communicating with them, but still they labeled her as feeble-minded, that she would never amount to anything. And she would have been fully aware of the horrendous medical experiments and things like that before she died in September. She was there for 6 months.
If I happened to be there and I had a young girl like her, that was so affectionate and was hugging me, full of joy, I would kidnap her and every other child in that pavilion, in both of those pavilions, and get the heck out of there. I would try my best to smuggle them out. These are innocent children.
I mean, on the flip side though, there was nowhere for the staff to take them. There was nowhere to go. You're in Nazi-occupied Austria. I can see it from both sides. There were reports that there were some nicer nurses there. One of the little boys would say that he got really, really sick, and the staff is kind of the mindset of well, just let him die. Let it take its course. It's one less that we have to do anything with. She actually snatched him from his bed in the night, put him on a cart, and told him, don't say a word, don't make a peep, we could both die. Got him the medication that he needed, and then put him back in his bed. And if she had not done that, he would have died.
Wow.
And that's one that, would they have counted him as 790? Or because he died of, quote unquote, natural causes, would that not even count? I'm not sure how they were documenting this.
Yeah.
They didn't give him any sedative to start the euthanasia, so maybe he doesn't count it towards the 790, but they certainly were not going to help him to feel better either. So there were nurses in there.
Yeah.
She risked her life to help him, knowing that all he needed was an antibiotic. All he needed was something to get him, break the fever and get him help.
She's a freaking hero.
Yeah. There were some good souls in there as well.
I have just so many different feelings about everything. So it's I feel sympathy, but then I want to attack. I want to, there's just so much.
For sure. It's a very ugly situation from all angles.
Speaking of ugly, Heinrich Gross would preserve the brains and continue experimenting on them until it was discovered in the 1980s. He had 400 jars in his personal basement at that time, By 1942, Heinrich had murdered more children than any other doctor at the hospital. After the war, he continued working in psychiatry. 50 years after the war, Heinrich would be tried 3 separate times for his actions and eventually convicted of murder. He would serve no time due to his dementia diagnosis. The brains were finally released to the families for burial in 2002. When tested, some of the brains contained the poison luminol, which confirmed the children had been poisoned.
In 1944, Hans would describe children living with what he called autistic psychopathy. They lacked sympathy, had repetitive actions, struggled to form friendships, and had one-sided conversations. Sometimes they could not form speech or had varying levels of speech. The autistic term came from another doctor's evaluation on schizophrenia, especially the social withdrawal of schizophrenic patients.
The only one lacking sympathy here is Hans.
Agreed. And Anna.
That bitch. Hans continued his research, deeming a group of the children to be different from the rest. Today, we would see these children have high-functioning autism. Although the term was not created until the 1980s, these children would be labeled as having Asperger syndrome.
I have a friend with an adult son who was diagnosed with Asperger syndrome in the 1990s. He's brilliant and could read at a 3rd grade level by the time he was in preschool. He's also very antisocial and prefers to be alone. In school, he was the cool ringleader that broke the rules, earning him popularity. Today, he's included in the autism spectrum, but was diagnosed with Asperger's during its height. In Nazi-occupied Vienna, his combination would have had incredibly different results than today. At the least, he would have been transferred to Pavilion 17 for observation.
That's so crazy to think someone that you know related to this situation, like if this happened to this person, this is where they would end up if it was following the same rules. It's just mind-boggling.
Honestly, it does blow your mind to think, he is brilliant. He is so incredibly smart. He wouldn't care about the collective.
Mm-hmm.
So to Hans or to Nazi Germany,
Anna,
that's a problem.
Yeah.
Anna.
Yeah.
Like, that's a problem. Even myself, I don't have flat feet, but I have allergies. And I feel like if I had been alive during this time in Vienna, I feel like I would have been labeled probably for sterilization.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would be considered the weakest link. You would not want to pass those genes down. It's a terrifying thought how close you are. This is, a couple generations back and across the world.
Yeah, and I'm a chubby bunny, so they wouldn't want me whatsoever. They'd be like, they'd probably put me on lunch duty, to be honest. They'd look at me and they'd be like, yeah, she knows how to cook, and put me on lunch duty.
If that's the worst thing that would happen, I feel like that's pretty solid.
No, I get what you're saying. I put myself in situations like this all the time. Where would we have ended up if we were in Vienna at this time with all of this? My brother, he didn't have Asperger's syndrome, but he did have what is called MECP2 duplication syndrome. It's a very rare genetic condition that not many have heard of. He also had like a blood disorder, epilepsy, arthritis, autism, cerebral palsy, and more. His speech went as far as mama and dada. He needed round-the-clock care. He would have not been able to take care of himself alone at all. More than likely, he would have been transferred to Pavilion 15 and murdered. And I can tell you right now, because he had the chance to live as much as he could in this time, he was full of joy, so gentle, so loving, and one of the best people I have ever known. To have that much love and care coming from a special needs person is proof in every way that Hans and everyone around him were wrong. They murdered innocent children that had more compassion in their short life than what the doctors had in their long lives.
Very well said.
So Hans was actually recruited to the war effort as a doctor between 1944 and 1945. His clinic at the University of Vienna was bombed in 1944, and most of Hans's early work was lost.
Although some parents surrendered their children voluntarily, there were many that fought to get their children back. The children who had weekly visitors from family members were more likely to live, and as the trend became more and more known, the family members tried to make it for those weekly visitations. This wasn't always achievable for children that had been sent long distances to the nearest institution or the impoverished. Those families sent letters to their children that were sometimes just kept in the child's file and were never given to them. Between 1942 and 1944, approximately 300 children were released from Spiegelgrund, but a staggering 540 were murdered.
In 1944, Hans published a thesis on his autism findings. Hans wrote in German and didn't attend conferences about his findings, so it wasn't widely known information. In the United States, Leo Kanner was the first to define autism as a standalone diagnosis. Leo studied autistic children and shared his findings with the world, so it was Leo's research that became what we consider autism today.
World War II ended in 1945, and Hans stopped working on autism research. In the 1970s, he admitted that autism was no longer something he was researching. Instead, he published over 300 articles on pediatrics, psychology, and how death affects children.
He also cultivated the image of a man working with the Nazis, but attempting to protect the children in his care without drawing attention to himself. Since he was not a member of the Nazi Party, Hans was authorized to teach again in 1946. He was also able to take up his position at the University of Vienna Children's Clinic again. In 1948, Hans opened his own pediatric clinic.
Since Hans didn't work at Spiegelgrund, and although he was clearly referring the children for the euthanasia program, he seemed to fly under the radar after the war.
In 1981, British psychologist Lorna Wing discovered Hans' 1944 thesis. Her husband had translated the thesis from German to English for her research. Lorna's daughter was diagnosed with autism, but Lorna felt her daughter's behaviors were different from Leo Kanner's definition of autism. Lorna published an article titled Asperger Syndrome, a clinical account. This was the first time Asperger syndrome was used.
Hans had died the previous year in 1980 at 74 years old, so he would never see his name and research become popular. In its heyday, 2 to 6 people out of every 1,000 were diagnosed with high-functioning Asperger syndrome.
2013 was the turning point for Asperger syndrome. As more research was translated from German to English, it became apparent his actions didn't align with what Hans said he did during the war. At the same time, Asperger syndrome was combined into the autism spectrum, which covers a range of characteristics and experiences.
If you want to know more about Hans Asperger and the people involved in Spiegelgrund, I would recommend the book Asperger's Children by Edith Schaeffer. The book covers Hans' professional life, his research, and the research of his peers surrounding autism. We would love for you to become part of the Corrupt crew. You can find us on Patreon with multiple tiers and PayPal. This will score you our appreciation and will announce your name in a future episode. Both links are in the episode notes. Case suggestions and feedback can be emailed to us at corruptpod@gmail.com.
The sources for this episode would be listed in the episode notes. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our new Corrupt content. Please also leave us a review wherever you're listening to this episode. Bye!
Bye!